called The Workings of the Devil. Sound familiar? The Workings of the Devil. And so far we've looked at the first 3 messages, so we're going to wrap it up today. Satan's objectives, his overview, wide view objectives with mankind. And then as he zeroes in, specifically, he's got certain desires that he attacks us with. What are his desires for us, customized for us? Then again, just in general, his obstacles. So he'll throw anything in your path. He'll distract you in some way, so as to take your mind and your eye off of Christ. Yet Paul told the brethren in the book of Hebrews, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So he's the source, and he's the consummation. That he's going to wrap up everything, the beginning and the ending of our faith. And I pointed this out before, that when it says looking unto Jesus, there's actually a little preposition attached onto that word, looking away toward Jesus. And so when we talk about the devil's obstacles or his distractions, in order to focus on Jesus and look at Jesus only, then you have to look away from everything else to focus in on Christ himself. So that was last week's message. But now, how do we conclude a series like this, where we looked at his objectives, desires, and his obstacles? The only way I thought to conclude it back then was to show that he's been successful. We have to have a certain amount of respect for the devil. Well, what do you mean? We're not supposed to respect anyone but God. Well, we're to fear God, right? And give him our utmost respect. But keep in mind who Satan is. He has powers and he has abilities that go beyond our human powers or abilities. And so we do need to look at his successes. And the reason for that is, if you look at how successful he's been over the course of the last 6 millennia, then you do stay on your guard with him. In other words, you don't underestimate his power. So, I think of, for years I followed boxing, and there was a person who rose up among the ranks, wasn't taken seriously at first, because he was a young kid, 18, 19, somewhere in there, and it wasn't really taken serious by the established and reigning champs who had earned their stripes, and they made it to the top by defeating other opponents. And so I remember as a child, or as a kid, about maybe 7, 8 years old, maybe somewhere in there, 9 maybe, whenever that fight took place. But I remember seeing posters there in Havre at one of the theaters, and it was showing the 2 opponents that were getting ready to fight. And one of them was Clay the Mouth, and the other was Liston the Bear. The Bear, okay? And so Clay came along, this brash, young, cocky, haughty kid. And Sonny Liston was established and big and burly and all that. And so I don't think he took him seriously. In fact, I know he didn't take him seriously, because the great Sonny Liston ended up on his back, round 1, fight over. We've got to take the devil seriously. He's racked up a lot of success, and I would say probably well, I don't know, greater, but there's been a lot of great men and women who have fallen, and great nations who have fallen. What makes us think that we would be any more successful if we don't take him seriously? So this 4th and final segment is looking at Satan's successes. But here again, we're talking about the devil. He's not only just has enjoyed his successes, he's also got his destiny. So we're going to look at his successes and his final destruction. Yay! Finally. Finally. And so I want us to look at there's so many. I have a lot in this outline. A lot of I don't know how many we're going to actually get to, so I might have to just kind of spot check some of these as we go along. All right. We've got to start in heaven. So that's where we first are, I guess, not where we first are introduced to him, because that doesn't happen until later. But the scriptures give us the picture of Satan being in heaven. And so we have to look at that situation, how that when he rose up in pride, Satan was full of pride, and used his influence and the authority and position that God had given to him, used that to wield his influence over other angels among the host of God. And we're told in the book of Hebrews that, using figurative language, that he drew with his tail, because he's pictured as a dragon, he drew with his tail a third part of the stars, or a third part of the angelic host. And so he influenced. Now, I don't think that he forced them. I think that whatever he pitched to them, whatever plans or whatever grandeur scheme, a third of the angels went along with it. Now that's influence. I want you to think along with me the scene. The angels are in heaven. Where's God? In heaven. So you're about as close to God as you can possibly be. With all of his influence and knowing all there was to know about God at that time, and his massive power, how any angel would be so foolish as to listen to a fellow angel and leave the courts of heaven to follow a rebellious angel. That is beyond me. How they could do that. But they did. So what does that tell us right away? He's got some influence. He's got some major influence, because I don't think he forced those angels. I think he was so convincing, as we'll see later in the garden. I think he was so convincing that he influenced those angels to leave the presence of God and to follow him. And so we don't underestimate that influence or that power at all. We also see him in the garden, as I mentioned, where he's continuing to do his dirty work, what he does best, deceive. Now he deceived those angels. And so now he's in the garden, and he sees this, the first couple, Adam and Eve, and he approaches Eve. I guess he figured maybe because Adam was getting the information, they were getting the information from God to Adam, who's regarded as the son of God, that God worked through Adam directly, and then Eve indirectly, because the man was made first and then the woman. He attacked the woman. Attacked maybe her naivety or her position, or whatever it was. He saw something innate in her that he would be more successful perhaps rather than challenging Adam himself. And so that's what he did. He approached the woman. And we see his success in this. And I've said this before, that one of my professors pointed out that Adam had three choices that day. He could have just taken it, as he did. That was the choice he made. He could have refused, certainly, which he did not. But the third choice that my professor in seminary pointed out was that in his mind, in his opinion, Adam had a third choice. And that was to step up on behalf of his wife, who now was clearly separated from him. She was now in the process of dying. She died instantly, spiritually, from God, and she was going to go on to her death eventually. He could have stepped up and said, "Well, Lord, I'm not taking a bite of that fruit. I'm still alive. She is not. Would you take that, put that upon me, put that punishment upon me, and let her live?" I suppose he could have done that. Well, of course, God wouldn't have agreed to that, because God's standing order was and the day you eat it, you shall die. But he pointed out that Adam could have stepped up as an intercessor for Eve. Well, he didn't do that, of course. And so a second Adam had to be raised up who would intercede on behalf of sinners and fallen man. And so, but we see the strong influence that he had. He lied through his teeth. He distorted what God had said. He's a deceiver. The Bible says he's a liar and what? He's a liar and the father of lies. Okay? He originated the whole realm of lying and not speaking the truth. And so he manipulated her, and he met with her objections. He had something already to come back at her, and so convincing was he that she took the fruit. And so I would say that was a major score for Satan. He just plunged all of God's hope and plans for mankind down the tubes. What are you going to do now, God? Now they're on their way to death. What are you going to do now? So I can imagine his arrogance. You know, kick me out of heaven, will you? I'll show you. And so he messed with the Son of God, the firstborn of God. And but what happened? God said, no, I've got another plan. And so they had another child. His name was Seth. And he replaced, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's another victory. I'm getting ahead of my, I should look at my notes once in a while here. Okay. The devil's success with Cain and Abel. There it is right there, okay? And so, not content with having plunged mankind to their doom, he now messed with the family. He now messed with the family. And he raised up one brother against another brother and incited him to be jealous. Cain was jealous over Abel because, do you kids know why Cain was jealous over Abel? Do you guys remember that story? Why was Cain so jealous over his younger brother Abel? Who remembers? See, Asher racking his brain. Think.
Because Abel got more praise than...
Yes. Abel's offerings were accepted by God and Cain's were not. And so that incited this rivalry and this jealousy. And then Cain lured his brother out of safety and rose up and slew him. And so now you've got mom and dad are on their way to eventually dying. They're separated from God. But God intervened and announced, he covered them with fig leaves. Incidentally, Andrew gave me a fig the other day. Delicious fig. How many have never had a fig? You've never had a fig. Never had a fig. Anyone else? They are good. They're very, very sweet. Very sweet. Just naturally sweet. Full of seeds. Okay? And he gave me a fig. But God intervened and slew an animal. I'm sorry, they covered themselves with fig leaves. He slew an animal and covered them with the skins of an animal. And so God overrode that mistake, right? And then projected down the road that there would be enmity between Satan and God. And so the devil rose up and slew, through Cain, slew Abel. And so now you've got one brother left, or one of the two sons left. The righteous one is dead. The unrighteous one is alive and well. Okay? And so the promises are not, it's clearly not going to go through Cain, right? He wrote himself out of the picture. And so what to do? God intervened again and blessed them with yet another son, the son of appointment, Seth. And so it would be through Seth that this promise of Messiah would come. All right, so all along the way we see his successes, but they're not complete successes, where God intervenes and comes up with a solution to that temporary problem. So God has always been, his finger's always been on the situation all along. So he'll override some of those successes. All right, as time marched on, as humanity, they were kicked out of the garden, so now they're, populating the earth. The devil was successful in swaying the whole earth, the whole population, to drift away from God. To the point, of course, where we see that God had to destroy mankind. Well, that's great. Now he's got all of them are on God's death list. Okay? Yet what? Yet one family was earmarked for preservation. He didn't go along with the crowd, and so he was marked for safety and to be preserved through that flood. And so, successful, yes, he wiped out all of Earth's population, but God was successful too and preserved one family. All right, now, on this side of the flood, we see mankind drifting again. So Satan back at it, influencing them again and drifting away from God, even after God's judgment of the flood. With that kind of track record, where God demonstrated His awesome power in destroying people because they weren't following Him, why would you want to go that route again? Wouldn't you want to look up to the heavens and start respecting this God? Well, most of the people didn't. And so now they're drifting again. But God already made a promise not to destroy them by water. And so He looked down again and He found one family that was worth His attention, that He could work with in securing these promises that He had made about the Messiah. Abram was raised up, and now through what seems to be a total success from Satan, with mankind having drifted away again, God raises up the seeds of a nation that He would have His eye on from that day forward. So now let's look at the nation that He began, the nation of Israel. Was the devil successful at any point along the way with this new nation, the nation of Israel? Very successful. Very successful. He had them thrown into slavehood in Egypt. And so he was very successful in that. But then God delivered them and brought them out of slavery. No problem after that, right? They were loyal to God. They followed God to the T. Not true. They drifted. And so so the devil then zeroed in on that disloyalty, worked a wedge in there. Pretty soon this one nation becomes two nations, the northern and the southern. So He's created splits. He's created divisions. In fact, at one time there was a civil war. Almost they came this close to a civil war. Of course, they had the first one. They had several civil wars, but they came this close to one, where the other tribes were going to exterminate. Who was it? Was it Manasseh, Andrew? Reuben, I think, the ones that stayed on the east side of Jordan. They were going to exterminate them because they set up this monument. To them, they were setting up the monument as a reminder that, look, the river divides us, not in heart, not in spirit, but just in geography. So we're going to set up this monument as a reminder that we're brethren. Well, that was misconstrued. And it looked to the other tribes like they were separating themselves and bringing a division. So they were about ready to wipe them out. But they explained, no, this wasn't the case. And they said, okay, well, so things were healed there for a while. So God thwarted that one. But the devil didn't leave this nation alone. He kept pounding away at them, causing whatever divisions, whatever idols that he could introduce, he did. To the point where the northern nation was washed away in the sea of humanity, just blending in with Syria, the northern nation, and lost their identity pretty much. But with that success, God says, that's okay, I've got one more nation. I've got the southern nation of Judah. And besides, it's through Judah that I'm going to raise up Messiah anyway. And so He protected that nation. Well, then the devil left them alone because of the promises. No, he didn't. They went after other gods eventually. And God had to take them out of their holy land and their promised land and remove them into Iraq, or Babylon. And there they were for 70 years. Forgotten about? No. God wasn't going to forget about His people. So while there, they drew closer to God. There were instances we see in the Old Testament where the devil was after them with such vehement anger and intense hatred that he raised up the likes of Naaman did I say Naaman? Haman, actually Haman, to exterminate them. And so the devil's always after these people. Yet God stepped in and saved the day. You're not going to wipe out my people. Okay? I made promises. So every step of the way, whenever Satan made a push against God's people, God allowed certain success, a certain distance to move the chains a little bit, but then he would come up with a solution. And so Queen Esther, basically, and her uncle Mordecai were raised up to step in and save the nation. So all along the way, he has had success with anything that's close to God, anything that God has endured, anything that God has his eyes, especially his eye on, has made promises to, they become a target, an instant target. Many of our brethren in the Dark Ages lost their lives, being tortured, because they were the ones closest to God. New Testament churches, the Anabaptists. So Satan had his eye on them, and so he targeted them through the Catholics and through the early Protestants. And so they all were persecuting the covenant people. The devil behind it, of course. So he has had many, many successes along the way. And then another major success. We certainly must include this one in a message such as this. After Israel, after they're being brought back to the Holy Land, and a nation gathered again as a nation, under Roman rule, the promise of the Messiah arrives. And as soon as that time had come, the devil made his push, and through King Herod, wanted to destroy the Christ child as an infant, as a young person. And so he's still at it. Success? No. God stepped in and saved them, causing them to go down to Egypt for safety. He comes back, he grows up. Does he leave Jesus alone? Not in any way. Jesus now is on the brink of a ministry, a public ministry, out in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. Guess who shows up? The devil. He's going to try to end this thing once and for all by baiting him into worshiping Satan. Because that's really what he has wanted all along, Brother Scott, is he wants that worship. He got it from the demons that he took. You know, they idolize him, they worship him, they follow him whatever he says. Okay, so but he has it in a small portion. He wants the whole world to worship him. Well, it would begin with Christ. If he got Christ to worship him, game over. Jesus refused. There was a victory there. But what did he do? Well, I couldn't get Jesus to worship me. I couldn't get him to do my bidding. So I'm going to pick on one of his disciples. I'm going to work in the mind of one of his disciples. And we're going to get this guy murdered. We're going to get him taken care of. So he works through Judas Iscariot. Success? Yes. But did it backfire? No, really it did. Because without Jesus dying, whether through Judas's influence or his part that he played or not, it was for our benefit that Jesus died. In fact, he needed to die in order for us to be saved.
Amen.
And so, was he successful through Judas? Yes, if you look at it from just that and stop. But it really backfired on Satan. All right, so those are some of the, spotted a few of the successes. We could travel through the book of Acts. We could visit the ministry of Paul. We could see the persecution on the church. We could look at all those, but let's move on to the termination, the destruction of the devil, because that's the part that I think mostly interests us. When I say mostly interests, we all are aware of his deception. We're aware of his trying to introduce distractions, because what we read in the Bible about other people's distractions and specific being his target, we've experienced the same. But collectively, together, we're waiting his final annihilation. Let's turn to the book of Revelation at chapter 20. And let's look at verse 11. 11 through the end of the chapter. John writes as he records the vision given to him, "And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away. And there was found no place for them to hide, as they were fleeing. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every man, according to their works." Now, what's interesting is, this is at the end of the 1,000 years. So, in a sense, they've already met a certain judgment. They've already been judged to at one level, and that is, A, not members of the bride, to live through the millennium in the city. B, not members of society in the kingdom during the millennium. Okay? So they didn't even qualify for that. Okay? And so we find them now, they're judged according to their works. So now their life is reviewed, played back as it were, and their works are brought up to the forefront. And now it would be based on the works, their life, that they will be assigned their final degree of judgment. And so everyone's coughing up the dead, wherever the dead might be, brought together, as it were, and into this situation. Death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. And so we find that at the great white throne, people are raised up. And I believe, in just putting things together in my thoughts and other scriptures, I believe that at the great white throne judgment, there'll be two camps of people. There'll be those who were unsaved, and thus were not allowed to go into the kingdom at the outset. And those who had been saved, but were dead prior to the kingdom, so they're not going to be resurrected, because, as we'll see in just a moment, at the first resurrection, only the righteous are raised. If you were unrighteous, you may have been saved, but you died before Jesus came back. You're going to sit in that in Hades for a long time, for 1,000 years, only to be raised after the 1,000 years, and there meet up with your judgment. And so I believe that that group also will be met with. It's not real clear what happens to them after that. You get the new heavens and new earth. So my thought is, my speculation is that they're folded into, because they are saved, they're folded into those that were saved out among the nations. That's the best I can do on that. So, but what's interesting, and the point being here, that the devil is thrown into the lake of fire. Finally, he gets his just reward. Let's turn over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We might get back into Revelation here in a moment. Let's go to 2 Thess chapter 2, verse 8. And then that wicked one, then shall that wicked one be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. The word brightness, I believe, is our word epiphania, the manifestation, the brightness, the radiance of his parousia, or his arriving presence. So he shall destroy with the spirit, that sword that's in his mouth. When he comes back, John said that it was a sword that proceeded out of his mouth. That's the word of God. And so he's going to pronounce that judgment, instant judgment, and he's going to destroy him and all his abilities, his power. He's going to take the kingdom away from him. Because if you can picture the scene at that particular time, he has influenced these nations, and yes, God is very much a very large player in this also. Satan has incited these rebels and to march up against Israel. God has also incited the nations and to put hooks in their jaws and to draw them down to this valley of Armageddon. So then he intervenes on behalf of Israel and saves many of them. He won't save all of them. 2/3 of the Jews are going to be slaughtered. It's unfortunate, but that's the case. But he's going to preserve a third of them, and they will represent his, having kept his promises to Abraham. He's going to preserve them down there in the desert, 144,000, and they're seen. Jesus is seen leading them from Bozrah with a garment that is stained with blood. And so I like this verse because it says he will destroy him with the brightness of his coming. Now we find back to Revelation chapter 17, we find that at the time that Jesus returns, as he's making his way down to the earth, in the sky, angels are with him. He's called up his bride to meet him in the air. There they join him. They'll forever be with him. He makes his way down. He descends toward the earth. In Revelation 17:14, these, the ones on the earth, these nations that have amassed themselves as enemies to God, are coming after Israel. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And so here again, all these nations that Satan was instrumental in deceiving, to actually fight against the Lord and expect a victory. Imagine that. Has deceived them, they are destroyed. So this is the day that we obviously will rejoice in. Let's just take another look at Revelation here, chapter 19, verse 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. We would be that army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast. There's that deception going on again. And them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone, and the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. So this is the day that we will be rejoicing. Our Lord is finally exonerated as given the due honor and glory. What amazes me is that the one true God has revealed his character, not only in the pages of the Bible, but just in history. If you track the rebirth of Israel in 1948, and the wars, of course, her war of independence took over a year, I think it was, Andrew, to actually become a sovereign state. But the wars after that, Vicki and I were watching the 60s. Have they shown the segment, the 6-Day War? Haven't shown it yet? Okay. The devil is always inciting her neighbors that actually were placed there as a result of France and Britain taking charge, or given the charge by the League of Nations, to actually plant these Arab peoples around Israel, which is all designed and ordered by God in the background, raised up to fight her a number of times. I think she's had four wars Yom Kippur, 6-Day War, Independence. There might be another one I can't think of right now. But in every case, especially the 6-Day War, the odds were so against him. What was it, 1 tank to 1,000 tanks? If God wasn't fighting for that little nation, which is about the size of our New Jersey, then who was? They faced insurmountable odds, and yet they're still here. Well, the devil isn't content. He's going to raise up another army, and they're going to go after Israel again. They're going to get, like I said, 2/3 of them, but not all of them. And so, I'm excited, but the thing is, with this kind of a track record, that someone must be looking out after these people. Why would you even dare go after them? Well, some of their enemies have figured things out. Said, you know what, it's been impossible just to do a front assault. So they just keep chipping away and just, pecking away at them, lobbing their missiles, and then just getting the world to on their side to hate them. So they're doing other ways, of course, to chip away at Israel's credibility in the world. But that's all right. Our God is going to win. The last man standing, well, that last man standing is Jesus. And the devil will be put away. Finally put away. Okay? Well, at the end of the 1,000 years. He's coming back at the end of the 1,000 years. So what's that all about? I believe that during the 1,000 years, as there be children born, they have to be tested too. And so just as those angels in heaven were tested, among the population of the angels, there had to be a test put in front of them. Lucifer raises up, draws them, many of them away. So at the last part of this 1,000 years is ended, there has to be a test for those alive at that time, whether or not they want to go on with Jesus in the kingdom and serve and worship under him, or do they want to go with a new leader. So he said, okay, I'm going to put you to the test. So he releases Satan out of his prison, sends him back to the earth. He does his work. He goes around. He's forming parties that will agree with him. He's doing his deception again. After 1,000 years of peace, 1,000 years of righteous rule, how would people even want to go with that? That just shows the sin nature, just the sin nature, just rebellious at the very, very core. So he gets an army. Brother Ben, the army is as the number of the sands of the sea. It's not a small army. A lot of people are deceived again because he's good at what he does. He's good at, he's a slick willy, this guy. And after all of this evidence, everything in the Bible has panned out, it's been true, it's been proven, it's happened, he's able to muster an army of fools. Well, God doesn't waste his time. Okay, that's it. I know now who's on my side. Boom, brimstone. You're done. You're toast. You're out of here. New heavens, new earth. Let's get on with the people that really love me. Okay? That's what it's all about. Last final scraping away of the dross and the scum, washing his hands, starting over with new heavens and new earth, with a people that wanted to be with him. Okay? What a wonderful time that would be. But the time, of course, to prepare for all of this is now, before Jesus comes. So we get the very best when Jesus comes. Shall we stand?